Hello, everybody. This is Jacob Sapochnik with the Enchanting Lawyer Podcast, the show where we interview the most inspiring entrepreneurs, professionals, and a few attorneys about their journey, and we learn from them and get inspired. Today, I have a special guest because I got a lot of emails from people that are not yet attorneys, law students, people that want to go to law school from all over the world. And they asked me to cover the area of what happens before law school, what happens before we think about this profession. So while I know many people listen to the show who are not necessarily attorneys, they get different tips from our social media and other things. I wanted to get this today episode on the law students and people that are thinking about law school and on the young attorneys. And I have an exciting guest, Alison Monahan. She's the founder of the Girls Guide to Law School, and the co-founder of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, legal career site, Trebuchet Legal. With all these projects, she aims to demystify the law school and the early legal career experience and help students achieve great results with minimal angst. Alison is a graduate of Colombo Law School and spent several years working as a big law patent litigator. She also clerked for a federal district court judge in Boston. And Alison, welcome to the show. I'm very, very excited to have you here.
Thank you. I am delighted to be here.
And Alison, you are in San Francisco right now, right?
I am.
Excellent. So I gave a little intro about you. Why don't you tell our listeners just a little bit more about you and your blog and the other things that you do?
Sure. Well, I have a slightly unusual background for an attorney in that before I went to law school, I had several other kind of career starts. My undergraduate work was in sociology. I was also supposed to go to med school. That didn't happen. And I ended up going and getting a master's in architecture and also working as a web developer programmer for a couple of years before law school. So to be perfectly honest, I kind of went to law school without a real plan for what I was going to be doing. I just decided I wanted to move to New York. Someone asked me what I was going to do there, and off the cuff, I said, well, I think I'll go to law school. So I can't really claim that I had the best thought out plan in the world for what I was going to do, but 6 months later, there I was at Columbia. I did very well, but I found it very stressful. I think I kind of lost my path a little bit along the way. I got kind of sucked into the world of big law, which might not have been exactly what I should have been doing, might not have been the best fit. And at some point, when I was in law school, actually my third year of law school, I had the idea for what became the Girls Guide to Law School. And it was really an attempt to I was frankly surprised by how gendered the legal profession was. So I was coming from a background working as a programmer in tech, very male dominated, but it really wasn't an issue. No one really treated me differently or bothered me. And I know that's not everyone's experience in tech, but that was sort of my experience. Then I get to law school, and suddenly there's all this crazy stuff going on in these firms and, in classes and at school and all this stuff. And I said, wow, what is this about? So the Girls Guide to Law School is really my attempt to kind of make the site that I wished that I had when I was starting law school, that said, these are some challenges you might encounter, but you can overcome them. Other people have run into these things, and I tried to make it, practical. Guys, read the site. That's totally fine. Right. And basically, after starting that site, I met my now business partner, Lee, who's in San Francisco. We actually met on Twitter. So let that be a lesson. You can have useful things happen to you on Twitter. So we met on Twitter. We turned out to totally hit it off. And then she was working as a bar exam tutor at the time, and her students were saying to her, I wish that I'd had these tools that you're giving me the second or the third or the fourth time that I failed the bar. I wish I'd had these tools when I was a law student. And so that's really what the Law School Toolbox is about, is giving law students the tools that they need to do well from the beginning and sort of eliminate a lot of the stress and anxiety and all that stuff that happened in law school by just saying, look, this isn't really that hard. And here's sort of a process that you can use, and that you can use on the bar exam to pass the bar. So that's kind of what we do, and sort of a little bit about how it evolved.
And you mentioned the bar exam and students getting frustrated. We just we're about 2 weeks away from the results of the California bar. The bar
they came out the week before Thanksgiving, which is probably the worst timing possible.
Right, but they always do that.
They always do it. It's so rude.
And I heard that this year it was one of the lowest passing rates in recent years.
Pass rates are way down across the
Hmm.
country. In California, I think they were down 7 or 8%, which is huge. So it was a really tough year for people.
So why don't we talk about that for a second? And I know that some of these people that are listening to this and they are maybe in law school and they're about to take the bar the first, second time. Why don't you talk about what's happening nationwide and as far as the exam, and is there a reason why is it getting tougher and tougher every year?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've seen different theories on why the July bar rates were so much lower. Some people say it's the people who are taking the bar maybe weren't as qualified. My personal theory, actually, on what happened is I think the reason for the MBE, the multiple choice drop, might actually have been a weird one off in that they were testing civil procedure questions, which are going to be on the test for real in
Hmm.
February, but weren't in July. And at least a couple of students have actually said to me, that really threw me off. Even though I knew it was coming, seeing these questions like really rattled me. So that's my personal theory. I haven't actually seen anyone else express that as a theory. But I don't know what's happening. I mean, the schools are upset about it. They're asking the bar examiners to sort of look into why, the pass rates drop so much. I don't think anyone really has a great answer at this point.
Hmm. And so, what are some of the states that it's really getting so hard right now? I mean, aside from California, obviously, we know it's one of the.
I think almost every state saw a
Hmm.
drop. And a lot of it was due to the MBE scores dropping. So that was
Right.
really across the country. I mean, there also were issues with ExamSoft crashing and people getting really stressed out. I know one girl who didn't go back after the first day because she was so stressed out about the computer crash.
Right.
So all kinds of stuff. But yeah, I think it's a great mystery actually at this point exactly what happened.
Well, I think that my theory is that it's just the legal market nationwide is so competitive, and I think maybe there's pressure also on the bars to say, what, we need to stop getting all these lawyers licensed
Yeah,
because it's
I
going to
think
crash the system. And look
I
at
think that's
Japan.
also, yeah, I think it's also a possibility. And I think there's kind of tension, right, between the schools who want to get all of their students licensed, and part of
Hmm.
their accreditation is based on their bar passage rate. And then the people who are already admitted to the bar, they have an incentive not to admit more people. So I think there's a lot of stuff going on. And I think you're right, a lot of it has to do with the difficult job market.
Hmm. Absolutely, it's very very difficult. And we'll come back to this point maybe later on, but I want to take us to kind of a more of a general question and say, I mean, if I ask you, if somebody asks you right now, why should I go to law school right now? If somebody comes to you and say, you have all this knowledge about the bar and you've been interning yourself, why would I even go to law school? I mean, people telling me I should go to law school. What would you say to somebody who asks you that question?
Well, I mean, my response to people who come, and people ask me this all the time,
Hmm.
like, should I go to law school? And my
Right.
response is really, what are you doing there?
Hmm.
Do you have a clear path that you can see yourself being happy? And so I always encourage people, look, you can't just make this decision. And I mean, you can, but it's probably not going to end well. If you want to make sure that this is actually something for you, try to get experience. Try to, even if you're working as a secretary in a law firm or whatever, at least you're seeing the day to day of what a lawyer does. I mean, people have no idea when they go to law school. I had no idea
Hmm.
like what lawyers actually do all day. I don't think most law students, frankly, know, you might know a little bit, but you don't really know, like, what does a prosecutor do all day? At this point, I have no idea. I have friends who do this work and I don't know what they do. So I think the point is, you really ought not go to law school, I think, unless A, you actually want to be a lawyer and you
Right.
know what that means. And that you're pretty sure that your skill set is actually your talents and your skill set are actually suited to this. I have a different master's degree in architecture. I was a terrible architect. Um, there was no way I was going to succeed in that profession. It just wasn't what I was good at. And unfortunately, I think sometimes people go to law school and it's just actually really not where their interests and skills lie, and they're doing it for some other reason. And ultimately, I think that just gets really frustrating. I mean, that being said, there are lots and lots of different ways to be a lawyer.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes people who are not happy in one area of the profession, they might be very happy doing something else. So, maybe like I was a litigator and I have friends who were litigators, and some of them eventually realized, I don't really like fighting all the time. Like that should have been obvious, but nobody asks you when you're in law school, like,
Right.
how do you feel about conflict?
Right.
Like that should be a question you ask yourself before you become a litigator. And so some of these friends have transitioned into different roles, say, corporate counsel at a startup or something, and they love it. They're doing something that they're building, they're helping someone build something. They're not fighting all the time. So I think just being really aware of, what your personality type is. Some people really, really like to fight and they like to win. And you might be really happy being a litigator, but if that's not your personality, it's probably going to become a drag.
Right. And Alison, I think that, and I found a very interesting section on your website. Actually, I was doing a search because questions people ask me, and people always would say, well, I want to go to law school because there's so many things that I can gain by going to law school. And you have this section there that talks about the myths. And I find it very interesting, and I think I want to go over some of these points. So I talk to attorneys who are not happy. And I said, well, what did you even go to law school? I mean, you've been doing this for 3 years, and I thought lawyers make a lot of money, and I didn't know what else to do.
Right.
And some of the things that you have there is the perception that attorneys are successful, they make a lot of money, which obviously is not the case. I mean, some lawyers are successful just like any other business, and some lawyers are not.
Right.
And what do you think is that? Is it because of the media or?
I think it's a lot of things. I think a lot of it is people's parents, frankly, still have these misperceptions. And a generation ago when law school was pretty cheap and jobs were plentiful, somebody could go and take out minimal debt and graduate and get probably a pretty decent job. But what you see now is really this kind of bimodal salary distribution where you get, a certain degree, a certain small number of graduates are making a lot of money at these big firms. They're making $160,000 to start plus bonuses. And that looks fantastic. Your parents are like, awesome, my kid's going to be making six figures. But the reality is, only a very small handful of people get those jobs. Right. And then, frankly, most of those people hate them and end up quitting in the first 5 years anyway. And the other set is that, it tends to cluster around $50,000 or $60,000, which, in certain parts of the country is frankly not really that much money, particularly not when you're talking about having an average debt load of over $100,000. So I just think the economics of this are really skewed. And I think there's better information now than there was, say, 5 or 10 years ago about this, but it just hasn't, I think, particularly parents, like the perception just hasn't caught up with the reality that this is actually a pretty risky financial decision if you're going to be taking out loans, and particularly if you're not sure that it's actually a career that you're suited for, and frankly, if you don't like to sell things. I mean, lawyers, typically are not, they don't think of themselves as salespeople, but ultimately that's really, in some sense, what you are.
Right, exactly. And the interesting point is that people look at this as a money-making opportunity. But also, one of the things that was mentioned in your article is a law degree is kind of like a golden key to opportunities. It opens the door for different things. And I wanted to talk to you about this because the question is, what can you do with a law degree if you're not going to be a lawyer? And I think people are wondering, well, now I have a law degree and I want to be a lawyer. What else can I do with it?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you have the law degree, there are lots of things you can do. That being said, I don't think you should necessarily go to law school expecting to do something else with it. In my opinion, absent some very specific other circumstances, I do not think people should go to law school unless they want to be a lawyer. That being said, it is a sort of training that can be helpful other places. It does teach you to think more rigorously, ideally. Teaches you to write clearly and think clearly. And these are skills that you can transfer. I mean, the flip side of that, though, is that, a lot of businesses either, I don't know if it's a misperception, but they have a certain perception of what a lawyer is. And I think I have an article somewhere about this, that they don't necessarily want to hire that person. If you're a business person, if you're an entrepreneur, you might not want the person who's really risk averse and is always looking for problems, which is what you're trained to do in law school. I mean, that is useful. But at the same time, we hire lawyers now. So, there are certain situations where now I'm an entrepreneur and I'm hiring a lawyer and they're telling me these things. And I'm like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to make a different business decision than the legal advice that you're giving me. I mean, this is not like major stuff, but, places where they're like, I don't think you're going to get this trademark or something. And I'm like, okay, I understand why you think that, but I'm going to file for it anyway.
Right. Well, like I said, it's something that, even though we have all this information available, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I understand, we have limited amount of knowledge out there. People are still kind of relying on their parents or myths. But now it's all over the news. I mean, we see attorneys who are not doing well. We see a lot of problems with this profession, and yet law schools are still they have waiting lists of people who want to become lawyers.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It really is. And I mean, I'm not saying that I don't think. I mean, I think the law certainly can still be a very noble profession. Mm-hmm. And the irony is that there's a huge unserved market of people who need lawyers for really legitimate reasons that can't afford them. So it's a very interesting question because you've got this huge unmet legal need. You've got all these underemployed or unemployed attorneys. And then the question is kind of how do you pair these people up? And then the problem, of course, is the debt load because people can't just not pay their student loans back. I mean, they can, but it's not an ideal solution.
Right. I mean, I think this question is going to be debated for years. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because and another thing that I don't have clear answers on that. Probably a year ago and even before, there were these lawsuits of students who were suing law schools because they claimed that they promised them a job and at the end of their degree, but they couldn't find. Yep. What do you think of this state of mind of I'm going to sue my law school because I didn't get a job they promised me?
Yeah, I mean, I can see both sides of this. I don't think it's the best use of anyone's time to be suing their school. You could probably be spending that time more productively starting your own solo practice or whatever. I mean, that being said, I do think there was a period of time when the schools were probably intentionally hiding data, shaping data in ways that weren't really accurate. I think there is better data now. I mean, there's a project called the Law School Transparency Project that started maybe 5 years ago, and they've really done a lot to sort of advance the cause of good data. But I mean, the problem, none of these figures are audited. The school's job numbers are not audited. They could be making stuff up, and in some cases they were blatantly making things up. I think the data is better now, although honestly I don't think a lot of incoming students look that carefully at it, and I would encourage them to do so.
And it's interesting because the way I look at it, and there was an interesting article by Kevin O'Keefe, the guy from Lex Blog.
Yeah, he's great.
And he's an amazing guy, and I really like the way he thinks about the profession. And in his article, he was talking about why it's the best time to be an attorney and what law students can do in law school to still be able to get a job even before they graduate. Mm-hmm. And what I like about this approach is that I agree with it. I mean, there's so many things that law students can do while they're in law school to make their chances so much better to get a job. And I just wanted to get your take on what you think they should be doing, and then I'll kind of add some of my thoughts as well.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think there are huge opportunities to build networks while you are still in law school in ways that did not exist even when I was in law school. So I graduated in 2006, and at that point, Facebook didn't exist. LinkedIn, I don't think existed, maybe. Twitter didn't exist. So, I mean, there are, the kind of traditional networking things, which I think are absolutely critical for students to be doing, joining the bar association in the town, particularly if it's where they want to work, building those relationships early, going to things, going to events, like getting out and, it's easy for people getting to know your professors, getting to know your classmates, getting to know people in the administration. These are the people who are really going to help you find that job. And I think sometimes students just think, oh, I'll just go to, on-campus interviewing and that'll get me a job. And that occasionally, it works for some people, but frankly, not for most at this point. And I don't think a lot of law students don't really have the skill set to get out there and hustle, but that's really what they need to be doing. And, right. There are ways to do that are not so threatening to your self-esteem or whatever. How hard is it to show up as a 1L at a networking event for the city bar? Like, that's not really that big of a deal. You need to be able to do those sort of things. But then I think to Kevin's point, probably, I'm guessing, using things like social media and blogging to make a name for yourself or just to make these connections. I mean, students reach out to me on Twitter or, through our Facebook page or even through email, and I'm always happy to help them. I'll never not respond to an email because I see that as a service that, I'm just doing for the world. But, not that many people reach out, even when you tell them, like, hey, I'm on your team, you can reach out to me. But if someone does and they say, hey, I really enjoy this article that you wrote, here's a follow-up question I had. Do you have anyone I could, any resources you can recommend about this particular topic? I'm not going to respond to that, and then that's a way to start building a relationship.
Right. And I think, now it's so easy to do that. I mean, before it was much more difficult. You said, you go to the bar association's networking and it's kind of hard because you don't know the people. But today you start building your Twitter follower from day one, from the first year. Start making connections, start making comments. Like you said, give your opinion on an article that another attorney wrote, and build your platform while you're in law school. At the end of those 4 years, you come out of there, and you have followers, on Twitter. You have a Facebook following, and you have something to show when you go for a job interview. So I'm already connecting with all these people. I can bring something to the firm.
Exactly. And that's a skill, that's an area that young lawyers, I think, can be extremely beneficial for a firm. People graduate and they think, oh, I don't have anything to offer. But if you know how to use these tools and you know how to build a following, that's incredibly valuable for a small firm that might want to hire you. Like, maybe they want you to take over their social media and you know how to do that. You understand how to build those connections. That's incredibly valuable.
There's a recent example from Michigan State Law School, and they kind of consider to be one of their more active schools online, where their students are using social media without the direction of the school to kind of brand themselves. They're connecting with influencers online, LinkedIn. They start building followers individually, and the school has nothing to do with it. It's the students' idea to do this because they want to be creating themselves a platform before they graduate, which is remarkable.
They have a couple of really innovative people there. They're doing some interesting work, and I think are building that type of community, where that sort of thing is seen as valuable. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was back at Columbia maybe a month or so ago. I just happened to be in New York. I ended up meeting with an old clinic professor of mine, and she says, it was actually a lawyering in the digital age clinic. And it turned out there was this project that I had worked on that I didn't even know had been implemented. And she said, oh, no, it's used around the country. And I was like, well, do you have other projects like this? Do your students do things that are actually like out there in the world? She's like, oh, yeah. I'm like, well, do they promote them in any way? And she says, well, we could really do a better job at that. So I said, use this platform that I have. And I'm happy to have your students, write a guest post about this amazing tool that they built for the courts in New York City. Like, this is information that should be in the world, but also it's great for them to have that out there with their name on it. And someone Googles them when they send in a resume and you see, wow, they worked on this really cool project. Like, I want to find out more.
Right. So it's just it's an opportunity that the students that are failing to take advantage of are really going to be missing out, especially when they graduate, because it's going to be very difficult to pick it up afterwards.
Yeah, and I think people get so focused on their grades and doing well in exams, and that's important. But at the same time, that that is not all that you need to be doing when you're in law school. Like, if you're spending 95% of your time focusing on your academic work, that unless you are literally like the top of your class, it's really not what you need to be spending all of your time on, and particularly as time moves on, you spend more time your first year on your classes, but by the time you're a third year, I mean, you should be spending a pretty good chunk of every day doing something about your career.
Right. Absolutely. So talking about this, what are some of the tips you can give young lawyers who just graduated, passed the bar, hopefully, and they're starting their career search? What are some of the, maybe let's focus on 5 points that you can share?
Sure. I don't know if I can do 5 in a row, but we'll just chat.
Well,
well, I think a lot of people don't necessarily have a lot of stress. And we're assuming, I think for this, you're assuming that they don't have a job yet. Is that right?
Correct. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So you've passed the bar. You've just been admitted. You're 4 months, 5 months out of law school. You don't have any real career prospects. What do you do? And I think the key thing is that you've got to start relying on the resources that you have available to you and really pulling those resources in. So a lot of people, they'll sometimes email us and they'll say, I can't find a job. We'll say, well, have you talked to your school? Well, why would I do that? It's like, go and talk to your career services people. Like, even if you've graduated, they should still be there to help you. Like, it's in their best interest to help you get a job. And so, and these are people who are connected. I'm not saying they're going to magically produce a job for you, but, this is a really good resource. And similarly, like, people, there's tons of information online about sort of, and not necessarily just in the legal context. I think most kind of career advice is probably better outside of the legal context. There aren't too many people who are writing really specifically about legal careers. I mean, the Girls Guide, we have a 5-part series by Katie Slater, which is awesome, about how to get a job. Highly recommend people read that. But, like really drawing other people into your job search and just doing the research. There are a lot of really great books. There's a good book. I'll have to, forgot who wrote it, but called something about like turning lemons into lemonade, about doing a legal job search in a bad job market. And he has some great tips in there about, what to tell people when you're networking so they can actually help you and things like that. But I think people they need to draw on their resources, and they have to really get curious about what the process of finding a job looks like. And I don't think a lot of people have been taught that in law school. It's like, oh, you didn't get a job at OCI, too bad. But there's a whole process, and it might take a while, but it's stuff like, doing pro bono work at the Bar Association so you can find mentors, starting a blog on a topic of interest so that you can start meeting influencers, things like this that frankly, they take a little bit of courage to do, but they're not totally impossible. And it's really just about getting a lot of kind of, pieces out there, because you can't tell what's going to end up resulting in a job.
So you feel pretty optimistic about chances of young lawyers to really land good jobs if they follow some of these tips?
Well, to be honest, it's a tough job market. And I think, I think the thing is also people have to look at it a little bit longer term. And I think this can be hard because it's disappointing, right? Like, it's disappointing that you've gone to 3 years of law school, you've done pretty well, you've spent all this money, you've passed the bar, you've become a lawyer, you expected that you were going to get this $100,000 job, right, and you have nothing. And so I think, kind of sitting with that and really not ruminating on like, oh, I'm such a failure, but just saying, wow, this is disappointing. I acknowledge that this is disappointing, but I'm still going to take steps to make things better. And I think that, I've heard from, I started this site 3 years ago. So there's some people who wrote me in year one and they were in total disarray. I can't find a job. I should never have gone to law school. Everything's a disaster. And then sometimes those people write back a few years later and they say, things are looking a lot better. So I think there's got to be some sort of patience. The millennial generation, some people think that they're entitled. I'm not sure that's exactly true, but I think there is this sort of perception that like, oh, I've earned this or I deserve it. And it's difficult, to say, wow, really, I'm an entry-level person. I don't actually know what I'm doing. I don't know how to be a lawyer. And this is going to be really tough for a while. So, I'm not saying, I certainly don't think you're just going to magically be like, yay, everything's awesome. Right. But I do think, the reality is, as a lawyer, you're a member of a cartel. Like you, so, you can take advantage of that. Worst case scenario, you are entitled to hang out a shingle and start getting clients. And that's possible, and there are resources that'll help you if that's what it comes to. But, I think people just have to be ready to hustle. And that's not something that they're really getting a lot of instruction in.
And also actually having a plan in mind. Sometimes things will, it's like just like being an entrepreneur, whether you're going to work for a firm or you're going to start your own solo practice, it's not always going to be a smooth ride. And
I think it's just like, you've got to do something. Sometimes we get people writing us who are just like, oh, like, nothing's going to work out for me. And it's like, well, yeah, if that's really what you believe, you're right. But, this is not, it might be you're not in a great situation, but you've got to do something. And there are options.
Right. Keep moving forward.
Yeah, just do something. Try it out. See if it works. If it doesn't work, do something else. That's the life of the entrepreneur, right?
Exactly. Excellent advice. Alison, I have this question for you. And I always like to ask successful attorneys like yourself, what is a predominant characteristic of attorneys whom you admire? And I'm curious about that.
That's a great question. I think I always admire the attorneys who are just A, really very good at their craft, and B, who themselves were kind people, to the extent possible. So I'm thinking specifically of some people that I worked with who were senior partners, and they worked as hard, if not harder, at trial than anyone else. And they would sort of go into a room and they would just go over things and honing their craft and honing the questions they were going to ask on, cross-examination and things like that. And you just see this, and then you see how hard they worked. And then you see them in court the next day and it all looks so effortless. Right. And so I think, it was interesting being able to see behind the scenes and just seeing like, lawyering is really difficult. Like being a good lawyer is not easy. And I think just honing the craft is something I always really appreciated.
Excellent. And I think it's a great characteristic to have, and that really can help you be a much better attorney.
Hmm.
Now, what about one piece of advice you wish you had during your first few years after law school?
I think the thing that I really wished I had sort of either been told or if someone did tell me really taken to heart was to listen to my instincts.
Mm-hmm.
Because I knew on some level, like from the very first day of my very first summer position, that big law was probably not the right path for me. But it was something that I just ignored and took another job and a different job and a different job. I summered 3 places and then I took a different job when I actually started working. And, none of them were really the right fit because that wasn't really the right part of the profession probably for me to be in. So I wish someone had said to me, like, maybe you're not the greatest employee. Maybe this is not really what you're cut out to do. And maybe you should think more creatively. Because I would tell people at Columbia when they'd ask what my long-term goals were, I said, well, I think I might start my own practice doing family law.
Right.
And it was like I'd killed their grandmother. It was just like, do what? And literally people were like, you can't do that. I said, what do you mean I can't do that? I think it's possible. You might think it's a bad idea, but it was just so far out of the realm of what anyone else was aiming for. And no one ever said to me like, hey, that sounds really interesting. Why don't you read this book about opening a solo practice? So I kind of wish that I'd been given that advice to sort of trust my instincts more.
Right, exactly. And sometimes, we all have different advice we can give people. And that's why I feel that, what you just said is really crucial, because if people think about it early enough, it really helps you change the way you practice.
Yeah, and it was like what I was talking about wasn't that crazy.
Right.
It's like running your own practice is actually kind of awesome. I know lots of people who do it, and I think really, on the whole, I would say they're probably happier than most other lawyers I know.
Right. And as we come close to the end of our show, I wanted to ask you, what do you think, how should young lawyers actually approach the practice of law? What do you think, just your personal opinion?
Well, I think this goes back to really honing your craft. I think you have to be very, very good at what you do. I think you have to care a lot about the work that you're putting out. I think it's also really important to think about how you want to interact with people, whether those are clients or your co-counsel or someone else in your firm. What do you want your life to look like? And work is a huge part of that. Do you want to work with people you don't like? Lots of people do it, but maybe that's not the best idea. And really getting clear about, why are you doing this? What is it that's getting you up every morning and making you go and work 10 to 12 hours? Because if you can't answer that, I'm not sure that you can keep doing it for the long term.
Right. And I would add one more thing to this, is that just being helpful, the state of mind of being helpful,
Yep.
Is really going to be a game changer for a lot of these young attorneys, because most of attorneys are not helpful.
Right. And I think, yeah, exactly. I think, who are you serving and what are you doing? And really, ultimately, and I think this is a huge one for people who are thinking about advertising and things, is ultimately it's not about you. It's about what you can do for this other person.
Right.
No one really cares about you on some level, except for, can you help them with a problem? That's fundamentally what attorneys should be doing, is helping people with their problems.
Absolutely. And so, Alison, if our listeners would like to connect with you, why don't you verbally tell us where we can find you on the web and any other social extensions you want to share with us?
Sure, thank you. Well, my main website is thegirlsguidetolawschool.com, and that I'm on Twitter as Girls Guide to LS. I would love to connect with any of you. We've also got the Law School Toolbox and Bar Exam Toolbox sites, and the career site currently is named Trebuchet Legal, although we might be updating that soon.
Excellent. And boys are welcome too, of course, right?
They're welcome. I frequently get emails saying, hey, is it okay that I'm a guy and I'm reading your website? I find it really helpful. So if you can get past the pink, you're welcome to stay.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alison. It was a true pleasure. Lots of good tips. And I'm very happy that you came on the show today. This is Jacob Sapochnik at enchantinglawyer.com. If you have any questions, email me, jacob@enchantinglawyer.com. And you can also leave your questions in the comments. We'll look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you so much.